Hi, I'm Kay Corey with another edition of the Atom 101. Today we're going to talk about how the atom is not, it was not supposed to be intended or not supposed to be used against the very nature of itself, which is kind of what nuclear energy does. We're all made up of atoms. Every material that you find on this earth is made up of atoms. We're all atomically structured. And for those of us who are biologically structured, we have water molecules, and water molecules, when bombarded with radiation, or ionizing radiation, I should say, it deranges those water molecules and causes radiolysis of our water molecules, which causes H2O, H2O2 to form out of the H2O. It deranges or rearranges the atomic structure of our water and turns it into hydrogen peroxide, which causes cellular death or apoptosis. Sorry, I can never say that word. And apoptosis causes tissue damage and organ failure and a bunch of other diseases, and just about everything under the sun that is a disease is caused by apoptosis or cellular death. I think it also, well, it's not a conjecture, it's not a thought, it is science that when you get hit with ionizing radiation, it also weakens your immune system because your cells are sloughed off in your intestine, and your immune system, 85% of it or so, lives in your intestinal tract. And when you're swallowing and eating radiation constantly, your immune system cannot safeguard your body against anything when it comes in and attacks it, like a pathogen, a virus, or anything like that. So all the way around, ionizing radiation, ionizing particles, particulates of radiation like plutonium, americium, polonium, anything that comes from a nuclear reactor, curium, is just plain bad. It's not good for any biological beings. It's not even good for the robots that work around it. It crashes the robots because the robots are atomically structured, and it breaks down their atomic structure by a different process. It weakens the metal and deranges the atomic structure of theirs as just, differently, because they're not biologicals. Okay, now I'm going to talk today about nuclear witnesses, insiders that have spoke out against nuclear science since pretty much the 40s and 50s. There was this really good guy. His name was Dr. Ernest J. Sternglass. He was a physicist. And his saying about nuclear reactors is, "I could not remain quiet about nuclear reactors. If I had, it would have been criminal on my part. Secrecy is the one way an open society can be controlled, namely by keeping things from the public. The military supports secrecy, and the military is behind the entire nuclear reactor program and behind the entire Plowshare program. It is behind everything connected with nuclear energy, even artificial hearts powered with plutonium pacemakers." Now, the irony of him saying that a pacemaker in a heart that I used to help put in because I worked in a cardiac cath lab is powered by plutonium is such an ironic and iconic statement that I wouldn't even know where to start on that, besides saying that if they do put plutonium in artificial hearts or pacemakers, you know for certain that your medical industry is completely gone. They are not, well, I already know that they're completely not there to help you. They're not there to save your life. They're not there to help you get better. They're not here to help you heal. Now, there are certain people that are in the medical care that are good people. I was one of them. We are the light workers, are the people that actually help heal people and help people get better by giving our energy and our love and our light to people that are sick. And we do that just because we have love inside of us. Okay, I'm going to continue with Dr. Ernest Sternglass. This book, there is a book by Dr. Ernest Sternglass, Dr. Ernest J. Sternglass, and it is called Nuclear Witnesses, Insiders Speak Out. You can get it. You can get it, I would think you could get it off of Amazon or some place like that. I'm definitely going to get this book and read it. But I do have some excerpts from this book that I want to share with you. The following chapter is an excerpt out of the book, Nuclear Witnesses, Insiders Speak Out. He was, Dr. Sternglass was at the time a director of the Department of Radiological Physics at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School. And he shared his personal experiences and knowledge regarding the nuclear establishment. For decades, he had been studying the effects of low-level radiation on human health and was a staunch advocate of the public's right to know about the true cost and consequences of exposure to low-level radiation on the human body, especially the fetus, the young, and the elderly, as well as on the gene pool. Because when radiation does come into your atomic structure, our DNA is inside of that cell. And what ionizing radiation does is it goes inside of your cell and it breaks the strands of your DNA. Now, it can break it in two places. It can break it in a single place. It can repair itself, but if it breaks it to the point where it can't repair itself, then it can't repair itself, and your cells die, and your DNA is mutated. Okay, that's why you get radiological mutations. It's because it mutates the DNA structure of your cell. Okay? He said, and I'm quoting Dr. Ernest J. Sternglass, whose interests are being served here? He's talking about radiation. Who benefits? The gene pool of life evolving here for hundreds of millions of years has been seriously damaged in less than the past 70 years. Okay, he's going to go on and say, back in 1947, they knew. The data had been gathered at Argonne National Laboratory. They knew that the newborn puppies, whose mothers had been fed small amounts of radioactive strontium-90, were dying of underdevelopment and serious birth defects. The government knew and decided to keep it secret. The government set up the study. The government knew the results. And the government kept those results from the American people. Why? You know, that's a really good question. Why? Why do they not tell you, the average person, that ionizing radiation, it doesn't matter how much, what amount, is going to harm your genetics or your DNA. It will, because it does. It's been proven over and over again scientifically. And this is part of the proof. We at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School, in the office of the director at the Department of Radiologic Physics, Dr. Ernest Sternglass, came to the United States from Nazi Germany when he was 14 in 1938. He leans forward, gesturing with his hands. I know how a government can be totally destructive of its own people. How people in the highest level of government can use lies to achieve their political purposes. Well, no kidding. Dr. Sternglass had been working for almost 20 years to publicize the dangers of low-level radiation. Wonder what, and we don't have to wonder because we know, what high-level radiation does. It causes definitive changes in your DNA. It causes tissue death. It causes organ damage and failure. Depending on the amount of sieverts that you receive, millisieverts, it can cause death in a matter of minutes, seconds even. It can just completely vaporize you if you're hit with a big enough dose. So going back to, Dr. Sternglass had been working for almost 20 years to publicize these dangers of working with low-level radiation. His article on the increased incidence of leukemia from fallout, now we have to worry about that with Fukushima because we're getting hit constantly with radioactive fallout. Constantly when the wind blows from the west, and constantly when the wind blows around and the hydrologic cycle takes place with the evaporation, condensation, rain, rains down on our food, so the radiation gets into our food, it gets in our air, we breathe it in our nostrils, so we're getting it from every possible way. If we're breathing it in, we're eating it, it's in our diet, it's in everything we eat. There's no way to avoid it at this point. The Atomic Energy Commission poo-pooed the whole fallout paper that Dr. Sternglass had published in the spring of 1963. They said his statistics weren't good enough. His findings threatened the nuclear establishment. The government and the nuclear industry tried to discredit his evidence by making Dr. Sternglass out to be a kook. It took courage to continue to speak out because he was a human being. Because he was a real person with real feelings, a conscience, and a soul. People like him are going to speak out, and they're going to continue to speak out. And we're going to continue to try to dismantle the nuclear organization, the nuclear cartel. The year 1947 was a turning point for Sternglass. He had the opportunity to meet Einstein in person. They talked for 5 hours, all afternoon. He returned in a few minutes, and he's talking about Einstein. Tell me, he said, are you planning to go back to school? And Dr. Sternglass said, yes, I'm thinking about it. And Dr. Einstein said, don't go back to school. They will try to crush every bit of originality out of you. Don't go back to graduate school. And Dr. Sternglass said, and Dr. Einstein said, be careful. There will be enormous pressures to conform. And then he told me about his own life and his mistakes that he had made. Don't do what I've done, he said. Always have a cobbler's job. Always have a job where you can get up in the morning, face yourself, that you're doing something useful for humanity. Because nobody can be a genius every day. Don't make that kind of mistake. You know, when I accepted a job at the University of Berlin, I had no duties really. Nothing to do except wake up and solve all of the problems of the universe every morning. Nobody can do that. Don't make that mistake. Now, Dr. Sternglass says, while I was opposed to bomb testing and concerned about the misuse of medical x-rays, I still believed that you could keep radioactivity inside of a nuclear reactor. All you had to do was make it airtight. I believed we could have thousands of nuclear reactors without danger of radiation. But in 1970, my view changed. He continues on. Early in May 1970, I gave a talk at a meeting of physicists in Wisconsin. At that meeting, I secured a report put out by the Bureau of Radiological Health about radioactive releases from nuclear power reactors. On the plane home, I opened this thing and I saw that instead of .001 or 0.001 curies coming out of nuclear reactors, as I had been told about shipping port. Some reactors were discharging hundreds of thousands of curies, millions, hundreds of millions times more than what I had been led to believe. It was all in the official tables. I was shaken up, and I said to a group of my medical students at Pittsburgh, "What can we do now? What do we do now? If I'm right about fallout, and these figures are right about radioactive releases, then there must be increases in infant mortality around every nuclear reactor in the United States." So the students went to the library. I told them to take a look at the Dresden reactor near Chicago. And what we found was exactly what we had expected. The closer you got to the reactor, the more babies were dying. When radioactive releases went up, and as they do every day, out of every single reactor you have a radioactive release. The closer you got to the reactor, the more babies were dying. When radioactive releases went up, so did infant mortality. When they went back down, so did infant mortality. Babies were dying of respiratory failure and of all sorts of ordinary conditions normally associated with prematurity. Some would say, well, the baby was premature, that's why it died. But when we looked at the statistics, we found that prematurity grew 140% in the county when the radioactive releases went up and declined again when the leaky fuel rods were replaced. I got a friend of mine, Dr. Morris DeGroot, head of the statistics department at Carnegie Mellon University, to look at some of these things. He did his own study using a different technique, and he found definitive positive relations between releases of radioactivity and infant mortality. Until 1970 or so, I had really believed that one could trust our scientists and engineers to be honest. I really believed that our bureaucrats in Washington were honest people. I really believed that some of them were. They had written a report telling about the large leaks of radioactivity coming out of nuclear reactors. Little did I know that soon these honest people would be fired, stripped of their power to do any further detailed investigations of nuclear reactors. Their authority would be transferred from the EPA to the newly created NRC, our Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Really just a bunch of AEC boys that would be moved over. Nixon did this. I think he got a big payoff from the utilities, oil companies, the banks, and all of the other big corporations that had a heavy investment in uranium. The facts were devastating. The big corporations that were violating environmental laws and worker safety laws made payoffs so that the Nixon administration would go easy on enforcement. And Nixon promised the big energy companies no more regulation. We're going to hold the regulators down. All attempts to enforce tighter regulations were turned aside and sabotaged so that nuclear reactors were able to release the highest amounts of radioactivity ever recorded in the history of nuclear energy in 1974 and 1975 at the Millstone plant. 209,170,000 curies of radioactive gases were discharged. 2,970,000 curies of radioactive gases were discharged. 1 curie represents as many disintegrations per second as a whole gram of radium. The entire world's supply of radium in hospitals before the bomb was a few dozen grams, and they were releasing millions of curies of radioactive gases into the air of Rhode Island and Connecticut, not giving a damn, except about how much on time the reactor would have, how efficient it would look, and how many more reactors they would sell based on their excellent operating record. When I turned against nuclear reactors as contrasted to attacking bomb testing, the Health Department of the state of New York, the Health Department of Pennsylvania, Governor Schaap's Commission, the Atomic Energy Commission, and the Environmental Protection Agency all issued statements saying that there was no truth, no credibility in anything I had found. and I lost almost all my friends who had stuck by me when I was only attacking bomb fallout, because in effect I was saying that they were not only unwitting baby killers during the time of the bomb testing, but they were baby killers whenever they ran a nuclear reactor, whether it was at Waltz Springs, Shippingport, Millstone, Diablo Canyon, Tennessee, Tennessee, or wherever they're running a nuclear reactor. Okay? I could not remain quiet about nuclear reactors. If I would have, it would have been criminal on my part. Two things happened that led me to write this book. First, a doctor tried to convince me to take radioactive iodine for an overactive thyroid. I refused. Several months later, John Goffman told me I was very fortunate. The radioactive iodine, he explained, would have increased the chance of my getting cancer by more than 100%. So for you folks out there that are thinking about taking radioactive iodine for an overactive thyroid, this physicist is explaining that it would increase your chances of getting cancer by 100%. So don't do it. The other thing that led me to write this book was the accident at 3 Mile Island. Coincidentally, my thyroid condition had been diagnosed the same week that 3 Mile Island vented radioactive gases into the atmosphere. I read everything I could lay my hands on, groping for the truth behind the evasive reports published by the NRC. I finally read verbatim transcripts of the commissioners' meeting held the day after the accident. The words that these men said to each other stunned me. They had no idea what was happening and no idea how to stop it. Just like Fukushima, they have no idea how to stop it. They really have no idea how much release is being released from those 4 reactors that were destroyed. And now Fukushima Daini, the smaller reactor that's several kilometers away from Fukushima after the other tsunami that just happened the other day, went down, and I'm not sure what happened with that. So we may have some releases from major problems with Fukushima Daini, not just Fukushima Daiichi. Meanwhile, the government was issuing reassuring reports to the public. I wanted the truth. For the first time, I felt my survival was at stake. Nuclear power was not an abstract issue. It was a matter of life and death. I started to talk to people, scientists, doctors, nuclear workers. I interviewed 24 people who worked with or around nuclear materials. In 19 cases, I traveled to the person's home or place of work. Most interviews took between 2 and 4 hours and were followed up by phone interviews. I taped the in-person and telephone interviews and listened to them several times, taking notes. The question that I asked initially in each interview was about was about personal background. This was followed by a series of questions about the experiences that person had, which made him or her change or develop a point of view on nuclear power. I did not merely listen. When I did not understand, I asked questions. When I did not believe something, I said so. I asked for proof, for reasons, for the thoughts and feelings which made people act the way they did. I asked them to describe experiences in a way that I could see what they saw and hear, and people said and did. They described specific hearings and meetings. Again and again, I asked to be told what went through their minds as they experienced the things they told me about. It was these personal moments that brought me into their lives and that I attempted to bring to the reader. It is the premise of this book that if the American people knew the truth about radiation, there would be no nuclear issue. The information speaks for itself. In this book, people who have had direct personal experience with the nuclear establishment speak what they have learned. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I have had very, very intimate experience with medical radiation, the field of medical radiation. I have had experience with the field of chemotherapy, and I've had experience with medical radiation, quote, oncology. The things I saw in oncology would make anybody want to scream and cry and run out of that place and never go back. When you irradiate somebody, you are causing cancer to explode. You are causing cancer. You're not helping heal it. You are causing cancer to get worse, and you are making the person sick. You are breaking down their DNA. You are breaking down their cellular structure. You are not causing anything but death when you go through oncology. Okay? Now, as far as them using medical x-rays, you make sure you get the absolute minimum that you can. Make sure the doctor palpates the areas that you hurt in. Make sure that he or she will do a palpation on things that are hurt or you feel that are bad before they order any x-rays. If you've had pain for more than a couple of weeks and you didn't hurt yourself, then I would say go get an x-ray. But don't let them take 10,000 views, okay? Now, so Dr. Sternglass is saying, if the American people knew the truth about radiation, there would be no nuclear issue. If people, in almost every case, they have found their integrity as radiation workers threatened by involvement with the nuclear establishment. When they mentioned that something was done sloppily, that some regulation was being violated, that something was dangerous, their concerns were ignored, trivialized, rationalized, or twisted. Some, most, unable to work under such conditions and feeling their sense of decency outraged and their survival in jeopardy, begin to speak publicly. Then they found out that they were what they were up against. It wasn't just their boss. It wasn't just their boss's boss. It was the union, the utility company, the military-industrial complex that were insisting on the myth that nuclear power was safe. Let me tell you, carbon-14 is radioactive, and it is only emitted, it's rarely found in nature, rarely. It is only emitted pretty much in nature from outer space, okay? But it is exclusively emitted on this earth by nuclear reactors. So nuclear reactors are not carbon-free. They emit radioactive carbon, which is even worse than regular carbon. So when they tell you that nuclear reactors are carbon-free, they're freaking lying. They're liars. No one was permitted to challenge this myth that nuclear power was safe. No one was permitted to retain credibility. Nuclear power existed for the benefit of the people, and nuclear weapons were necessary for national security. Well, that's complete bullshit. And anybody that knows anything about how bad nuclear power is knows that there are definitely ways to keep the peace rather than have nuclear warheads and nuclear machines that produce plutonium, which is the deadliest thing on Earth, along with all of the other deadly things they produce, like americium, polonium, curium, and all of the other radioactive isotopes that will kill you if you get near them for any length of time. This is Kay Corey. This is our unpeaceful atom, unpeaceful nuclear energy 101. And I'm going to sign out for now. You guys have a great Thanksgiving and have a great rest of the week.